Phil is a senior partner at RAM, Relationship Audits and Management. He's been involved in their global consultancy practice, working to foster constructive business-to-business relationships between agencies and clients. He comes out of a marketing services background. Prior to RAM, which you joined about 13, 14 years ago, as I recall, you were at the Meta Group, and you had a long career at Y&R.
Yes.
Okay. Hayes Ruth has his own consulting practice and has been partner with the RAM practice in the recent past. That follows almost 20 years at Landor. And you ran your own marketing consulting firm for a period. So they understand the shoes that we walk in, and I've asked them to share some of the things that they are hearing and learning about the client perspective that I think you'll find illuminating. Take it away.
Great. Okay. So we're here to share with you what we've learned from literally thousands of interviews, thousands of assessments with clients. We've been at this for quite a long time, about 15 years. And as I look around the room here, you all know this business very well. You've been in the business a long time, and you know clients very well. So I'm afraid we're not going to tell you anything that you really don't know already. The issue that we see most of the time is it's not that agencies don't know what to do. They just don't do it very well often enough. It's the lack of consistency. So what we so often end up doing when we go back to an agency to say, here's what we learned from the client, we end up saying, guys, it's blindingly obvious. Just do it, right? So with that said, much of what we're going to cover today is really just plain common sense. About relationship audits and management, we're essentially a firm that's about improving strategic relationships between partners. We spend most of our time working with ad agencies and their clients. We're retained by both sides. We do agency performance assessments. We do win-loss pitches assessments. We do lots of training. We do M&A work, because if you're an agency, and think about it, if you're buying another agency, what are you really buying? You're buying the client relationships and the key people to serve them. So we do a lot of work in that space. And last but not least, we do quite a lot of consulting. As I mentioned, thousands of assessments, most of them online, but quite a lot in person or by phone. And there's a key difference in the two. It's no different than when you're thinking about research for a brand. It's one thing to read the stats. It's another thing if you can actually talk to the consumer. So it's the same thing for us, where if we can actually talk to the client personally rather than just doing it online, you get answers to all kinds of questions that you can't really ask. So our experience, we work with many of the great names in marketing, probably nobody here that you don't recognize. And we have a lot of experience working with the usual suspects, IPG, WPP, Publicis, Omnicom. So in one way or another, as the saying goes, the farmer's campaign, we know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. So that's what we're here to share today. So this is an interesting look at, and you'll see the parenthesis here, it's what clients say they want from their agencies, not necessarily how they behave every day. What's interesting to us is that relationships still matter. Becoming a trusted advisor continues to be the gold standard, despite the rise of technology and new ways of working. The maturity of the agency team, the ability to rise to that challenge of being a trusted advisor, is what it's really all about. So what are senior clients looking for? You know, it varies by company. You're not going to necessarily see all of these things at a given client. Frequently, they're looking for an extension of the client team, a lead agency capability, thought leadership. The creative multiplier has not gone away. Speed to market is more important than ever. Innovation, doing things differently, doing things better, very important. And the last point I know you're all very familiar with, clients now want outcomes. They don't really care about agency inputs. They don't care how many hours you spent. So let's take a look at these in turn. This is kind of the first quote here I think is interesting. The agency team is viewed as deeply engaged and immersed in our business, where there is an emerging desire for more frequent in-person conversations and phone calls, less reliance on email and text. This is a quote from a division manager out in Cincinnati. I get more than 500 emails a day. If there's an issue, please call me. Don't send me another email. I mean, it's so obvious in thinking about it, but it's a problem in our business, particularly with younger people. And I know Hayes and I are not as young as we used to be, but the truth is young people tend to be much more transactional and they're happy just firing off texts. It's not a way to connect with senior clients, and it continues to be an issue. Demonstrating business brand and industry knowledge, you can't put enough emphasis on this. The clients are not going to treat you as a trusted advisor unless they're confident you really know their business. I mean, it's obvious, but it's true. So what we see constantly, which is very frustrating to us to watch, is that the agency people, you know, did they actually go to the supermarket on the weekend? Did they walk down the aisle where their brand is on sale? Did they see anything interesting? No, apparently. At least that's what the clients think. I mean, it's staggering. You know, why wouldn't you be constantly thinking about how the brand that you work on is actually taking place in the marketplace? The client's going to be thrilled if you have an observation, but we don't see it enough. As I said, experience and maturity still count, and the trusted advisor is still the gold standard. This last quote is kind of interesting. While the agency continues to be seen as expensive, it's currently not an issue because creative is performing strongly, the agency is well regarded, and we have 26 months of same-store growth. I think if you took out the last phrase, this agency would be in trouble. You know, all these things are very nice, but if you don't have sales, it doesn't matter. Probably you can all think of a client where they've come under serious pressure in terms of their staffing. And so many clients now look to the agency to be an extension of their team. The issue is, I think, for the agency is how do you get paid for that, right? So, but it's an opportunity. And I think not enough agencies take it seriously as an opportunity. In some of the larger clients that we work with, lead agency, the opportunity is huge. One CMO that we talked to recently said, we have more than 30 specialist agencies working with us. How on earth can I brief 30 specialist agencies? I wouldn't get anything else done. I want an agency to take the lead and manage most of these resources. And that's a real opportunity for certain agencies, but it requires special skills. It's going to be somewhat different for each client organization that wants it, no question. It requires a lot of leadership. You have to ask whether or not your agency is developing that skill. And from my perspective, the answer is usually no. Because to be a really good lead agency, the account lead needs to have a vision of how marketing communications can transform the brand. And they need to be able to manage that vision across all the specialties. And most importantly, they need to be able to do it in a way that they're seen as an honest broker. And not just an honest broker within the holding company, but with other agencies as well. So it's skill and it's being an honest broker that really makes the difference here. So there are three aspects, I think, to being a successful lead agency. You need to be a reliable partner for the day-to-day clients. You need to be a true collaborator with the other agencies. And you need to be a trusted advisor to senior execs. And frankly, if you fall down on any one of these, you will not be a successful lead agency or a successful account director. One of the things that we see now as we look at how clients describe their agencies, some of the questions we ask are about whether or not the client views the agency as reactive, proactive, responsive, a leader. Sadly, I have to tell you that most of the agencies are on the left-hand side of this curve. It's not a great place to be. And it's because of the inability, I think, of the younger people to get beyond their immediate tasks of the day and actually think about how they could help the client. And that leads into thought leadership. It's interesting, how do you define it? Most of our clients define it as a combination of actionable insights supported by analytics and this is really critical, the human story. There's still a great place for agencies to really have consumer insights, but it's about the human story. The next point here is very interesting. Clients imagine that the agency sees things happening with other clients that they could learn from. But the agency rarely ever comes to them with, here's something we're doing for client alpha that might be relevant in some way to your business. I don't know why, but agencies don't typically do that. And so clients are really puzzled by that. And it's a missed opportunity for agencies. Ethnic insights are pivotal to some clients, such as McDonald's. And for the most part, from our perspective, agencies are not very good at this. It's something that they should really work at. It's not something you can pretend to be good at. You have to be really good at it. And the next point here is, does the agency have a learning agenda? Is it constantly trying to move forward? So as a bank CMO said to us, we want them to bring new ideas to better understand our customers and how to connect with them. The creative multiplier, it's an expression that Alex Kroll first used at Young and Rubicam about 30 years ago. It's still a pivotal issue. In the end, the clients will tell you the one thing they probably can't do is great creative. They can probably do everything else if they have to, but they can't do this. And yet the fragmentation of media, the proliferation of message has made it really difficult to have breakthrough work. But there are good examples out there. P&G, for example, at the moment with Old Spice and the Always Like a Girl campaign. It's doable. I think, however, the issue here is, and this is very interesting, this next quote, I want the agency to think smarter about how to make more noise for the brand when media budgets are under pressure and television delivers less and less. For a packaged goods marketer, this is a big, big issue. I cannot tell you how important it is. So I think agencies really have to figure out how to make more of a difference here. I was horrified when I saw the headline about P&G this morning. I mean, that's not a good place for us. So the issue is how to solve it. And a lot of thought needs to go into this. Getting it right the first time, more important than ever. It's not just getting it right the first time, it's getting it right faster. It's critical that for each client, you identify what's critical to quality, the CTQs. They're not necessarily going to be the same across each client, but it's critical that the agency understands what the CTQs are for a given client or a brand. And I'm not sure there's nearly enough diligence that goes into that. Too many agencies want to persist with, we have our way and we're going to convince the client to do it our way. But I can tell you in a place like Cincinnati, that is not going to work very well. There's a need for much better project management skills. You're not going to get it right the first time without great project management skills. And in social, innovation is key. It's critical to move fast. So just talking about innovation here, it's an interesting perspective from a CMO who's a great believer in innovation. And she has a concept which I find very interesting. She puts 70% of their resources into proven programs, the things that they know year after year drive the business. She takes 10% of their resources and basically throws it against the wall to see what will stick. It's kind of an interesting approach. And then she takes the other 20% and spends it on what was found to be successful the year before. It's kind of interesting when you think about it. It's a very kind of entrepreneurial approach. The question I would ask in a situation like this is, does the agency have the account lead that can keep up with it? I mean, that's the challenge here, right? Because this person is looking for new ideas, not just the same old. How can your agency make a difference? I think what's interesting here is most agencies probably have some kind of an incentive scheme. It's typically based on revenue growth, margin growth. But I rarely see it also geared to whether or not the agency made a difference to the client's business. And I think that's something that agencies ought to think more about. Because in the end, you're not going to get revenue growth and margin growth unless you're making a difference to the client's business. I mean, it's obvious, but we should think more about it. The next question I would ask any agency leader is, do your strategic and HR plans emphasize developing trusted advisors? So it's interesting. There's two words there, trusted advisor. So advisor implies you really know the client's business and you know how marketing communications can make a difference. If you can't really do that as an account lead, you're certainly not going to be trusted. So what's the agency doing to develop the next generation? And last but not least on this slide is, do you insist on a formal and consistent approach to monitor the agency's performance? How the client sees the agency's performance? What we see way too often, because what we'll often do is, not only do we interview the client, but we'll also interview the client-facing people at the agency to see how aligned they are. And guess what? Hopefully, most of the time, they're reasonably aligned, but it's shocking to see the lack of alignment on certain things. Lack of alignment on something like actionable insights. Lack of alignment on leveraging learning. What the agency thinks is leveraging learning, the client may not think is leveraging learning. So these are the kinds of things that you really want to know with your client relationship. Are you moving forward? Are you going backwards? Are you standing still? And what I would say is, how do you really know? The fact that you had lunch last week with one person is not necessarily the right answer. Doing this correctly? There we go. So I think I probably didn't tell you anything you don't already know. At least I hope so. The question of this is, how much do your colleagues know? Hopefully they'd say yes. I'm more disturbed about how much of this your account directors are really doing, because that's very iffy. And here comes the real question. How many of your clients would say your agency does some or all of these things consistently? That's the real issue. How many of your clients would say your agency does some or all of these things consistently? So one expert's perspective here, Tom Peters, even the stellar pioneering outfits don't try to measure it, and that's a mistake. So, you know, measurement here is critical. There are different ways to measure it. You don't have to use a company like ours, but do you have a robust assessment system to really know what the clients think at the executive level, mid-level, and junior level. That's a critical thing.
My turn? Thanks, Phil. Well, continuing with demonstrating our firm grasp of the obvious, I'm going to talk about wins and losses and how we evaluate those. And I'm going to start by elaborating a little on my own past. I was, while at Landor for 20 years, I was chief marketing officer for 10 or 12 of those years, which beat all the statistics, I believe, on that. But in that time, we not only put together a marketing program, but we realized that while Landor had a very good track record of winning pitches, and we were probably, at least when in the early 2000s to mid 2000s, probably at a 40 to 50% rate because we had a great brand, great reputation, everything else. But then, of course, we know what happened in 2008, and we know what happened to the business in general, and corners got cut. And so before that, we had done some assessments of wins and losses. We hired a private person to go off and do this. I forget who found, I think the Aldridge or somebody found this person. And she was very good, and it was a fairly informal process, but we figured out that by having somebody else do it, it was, for a lot of reasons that I'll go into later, was better than having us call up ourselves. Unfortunately, the woman got sick and passed away. And about that time, Phil came to me when he was starting to work for RAM. And I said, well, could you guys do this? He said, well, we already do it. And so what I'm going to take you through is the approach that RAM used. This isn't a little bit of a sell, but it's really intended to show you a proper system that we employed for most of our major pitches. And for Landor, back then, I don't know what it is now, but back then, a pitch had to be 250 to 350 for a project base to warrant something like this, or it had to be in an area that was maybe we hadn't gotten into. We never, we hadn't worked in, I don't know, digital something, and we wanted to know more about if we didn't win, why we didn't win. So what I'll do is take you through the process, and go. And we'll talk a little bit about, I'm actually going to take you through a very poorly disguised actual story of one client that an agency not to be named, but you'll figure out, went through. And then we'll talk about some generic, how we gave them advice out of that, and then some general observations, and then you'll be free. So the way we work it, and the way I think makes sense, this was also before we got involved with RAM, was about a 30-minute telephone interview. In some cases, an hour if it was really a high-level client and we could get a face-to-face. But usually it was about a 30-minute interview. And it began first with, we would bring Phil in, and we would give him time, either on the phone or in person, with whoever ran the project or ran the pitch, and maybe one other person, maybe not. So at least he was familiar with how what the issues of the pitch were from our perspective. And then there was a written report that we would provide. I'll show you an example of that. And then and after we did about 10 of them or so, we would ask Phil to come back in and to give us an overall assessment. What patterns do you see? What's been going on here? And because we did this with a consistent set of questions and process, we could actually get some metrics out of it was qual-quant, essentially, on a one-on-one basis. And out of that, we had key insights on what they did well and what they didn't do well, or we did well and didn't do well, and then some actionable steps that Phil was talking about earlier, because that's the key. So you will not be able to read this, but you will have these if you want to really dissect them. This is what a report looked like. It was about 3 pages, and it talked about who we talked to, and there was a set of questions that got to some fairly meaty issues. And then we would do a summary report. And in this case, here are the 10 clients down the left. The red ones, we didn't win. The agency didn't win. The green ones, they did. And this is not, at least from the perspective of the client, was not a good track record. Winning 30% in maybe big agency stuff is pretty good. Because you're talking about multi-million-dollar accounts. In the branding world, as I said earlier, these are project-driven, so you need to churn a lot. You've got to have a lot of them going. So for us, this wasn't good. And there were a lot of summary points as to why, and then we'll get into more depth in a minute. But either we weren't convincing, hunger was an issue, Obviously, chemistry is always a challenge, and we'll talk about that in a minute. In the cases where it worked, we got it all right. But what was more helpful to me was a chart that Phil put together, which really started to help us with territories. And if you look at the left column, RFP response and proposal rate, pretty grim. I mean, if you can't get the RFP right, you shouldn't be playing the game, right? That's pretty simple. It's all black and white. And so clearly there was a problem here if you got this far off on at least 3 or 4 of them. Understanding the business, sort of have to demonstrate that requires homework, and it does require thinking about them. And so there shouldn't be a lot of yellows where it was iffy in this case. On the other side of the ledger, this was even more concerning to us. Chemistry is difficult because not always do you get a chance to get to know the clients. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. But to not demonstrate passion or hunger is inexcusable. If you're not hungry for it, don't show up. And of course, not showing up for a lot of us is very hard because we're all hungry to get business, but you got to be hungry for that business on that day. And so that was obviously a problem for us. And then understanding what the key criteria, that goes back to understanding the brief. And all too often that becomes an issue. So this gave us some areas to work at. There was also some challenges in the strategic side. Since it's pretty obvious, I'm talking about Landor, and this is from 2012 or something, so this is long ago. But we knew that we were known for great creativity, great branding, great design, all of this stuff. Always a big yin and yang within our firm, and I would guess within some of the other major branding firms about, are you more one side than the other? But we were always trying to strike a balance, and here it looked like we weren't really doing that very well. So this would be a very simplified summary of the report that we gave. So talking to the client, talking to Landor in this case, when you get it right, you nearly always win. When it's cooking, it's really cooking. That means you got the RFP right and you addressed the brief very explicitly, the cases were relevant, interactions and the written response and any verbal response were strong, presentation strong, there was storytelling and clear preparation, proposed solution. In the case of branding, if any of you are in that business, you know that you don't generally go to them with the answer, unlike the ad agencies where you have to show up with the actual creative. We preferred, because that was the end product, when it was a fee-based thing, we didn't want to give them the answer in for free. So we would show up with, here's how we would do it, and here's an example of how we did it for somebody else. Understanding of the brief, quality of the team was consistent and impressive. Chemistry with the client was tangible. Senior level commitment was clear, and the role was understood. We'll talk about that in a minute. And of course, passion and hunger. But we also said clients select agencies they want to work with, not just who shows them the best solution. The how is as important as the what. And in this case, the home team, the client, our agency missed too often on the RFP, as we just saw. The passion and hunger wasn't there. The chemistry had to be correctly cast. And you can do something about this if you spend time getting to know them and studying them. And there's thanks to online and LinkedIn and everything else, there's really no reason not to have a very good idea of who you're talking to before you walk in the room. And if you don't have the right team, arguably don't go for it because you're going to waste their time and yours. And you have to understand deeply what they want, and that's not always what they say they want. That's the tricky part. As Phil was saying earlier, it is often a hidden agenda, but you have to try to suss that out. So you have to understand what the key issues are, suss it out. What is really driving this decision? In branding, it was usually about, there was some kind of there was a new CMO, or there was some sea change in the industry, or there was some M&A activity that forced a change in the brand profile. And all too consistently, when we failed, it was because we fell short of understanding that. And it's also very easy, sometimes because you don't have the exact right case study, you shoehorn in one that you think is going to do the job. But you can't do that unless you show how relevant it is. And sometimes we were sloppy about that. So that would be a pitch, and the recommendation was obviously to fix all those things and go forward. And we would actually take it pretty seriously and spend a lot of time talking to our people to see how they could do that, and we did improve on a lot of those issues. But in general terms, talking about why agencies win, and this is going to be repetitious again, but on the brief, read it and read it again. It means what it says generally. And you've got to at least have clarity about that. Now that's sort of obvious, but it's amazing how often we got it wrong. And it's clear that people still get it wrong. All aspects of the response have to be tailored to that. Your capability documents, pretty generic. Most of us have the same capabilities, whether you're an ad agency or digital firm or a branding firm, PR firm. We all know, and now more than ever, we see that everybody does everything. And I've worked directly with PR firms even last summer. I was astounded to learn that because I did a whole interview system with their client, and the first thing I asked one of their clients, we love this agency, they're great. Well, what do they do for it? Well, they do our branding. This is a PR firm. They do our branding. Wait a minute, what do you mean by branding? Oh, the logo, the positioning, all that. Okay, and they do our digital, and then they do this. So everybody's doing everything. So you don't have a lock on any of it. Doesn't mean they're all doing it well, but it does mean that capabilities alone mean pretty much nothing. It's what you have physically done and who you've done it for. Substantive claims, people can smell puffery. You can find it out. We're a transparent world these days, so there's just no sense. And in our world, and I think it's true in general in pitches, showing up with a bunch of logos on the screen. We just did it. But what did you do for them, right? And in branding, everybody's done something for somebody major, and those logos would go up there. So I used to make it a mission of mine that no logo went up there unless we had actually done that logo. Thankfully for Landor, they'd done most of those. So they'd done a lot of them. So it was easy to do. And if we didn't do the logo, I would point it out and say, we didn't, like Citi was an example, did a lot of work with Citi, did not do that logo, but we did this, 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 and that. So there was no question about it. And to me, that was being an honest broker. The Q&A parts that we sometimes get to do in the RFI period, you want to show you're smart, but it's a double-edged sword because you also don't want to give anything away, we know. And so sometimes those are all blind, so maybe that's okay, but many times we just have chosen not to do it because unless there's an issue that we really need to get sorted out in advance, we sort of figured it was kind of a crapshoot. Only current relevant experience in the category, we talked about that before. And then years ago, I heard Donnie Deutsch give a talk about business development, and when he was back running the agency, he was great. And he said, all those processes that you guys all have with your little trademarks and circle R's about them, they're bullshit. And in fact, they are. And Landor had one. We worked on it very hard. It was called a brand driver. There was a process. And we were proud of it, and it worked. But after I heard Donnie, I said, we did have a little circle R. We tried all that stuff. And I changed my tone. So when I would go into a meeting, I'd say, look, this is our process. We call it the brand driver process. This is how it works. This is what it does. And if you're talking to any other branding firm and they don't have something that looks very similar to this, you shouldn't be talking to them because that's how this work gets done in our industry. So let's not kid ourselves that we have some kind of magic. The magic is the people who do it and the past work that we do and the design and whatever comes out of it. And you can be the judge of that by what I'm about to show you, right? But the process is pretty much the same for everybody. On the pitch itself, in advertising, people only remember 2 or 3 things. They can't remember more than that. Same in a pitch. What are the 2 or 3 things you want them to walk away with that will set you apart, that is what you want them to have? Gauge their culture and dress appropriately. I think we overdressed for this. It was his idea. Clients look for teams, obviously, that they feel comfortable with. That's the chemistry part. Not always easy to do. We've all made mistakes in that area because you get a bad signal. But it should be easier now just by being able to go online and do some research. The senior partner, we tried this a number of different ways. We would have it's good to have a senior partner. We sometimes lost because we didn't have a senior enough person in the room. But on the other hand, if you have somebody in there and all they're doing is sitting there, or if they are bullshit because they're really not going to ever show up again, that's wrong too. So you want them to have their role clearly defined if they're going to be in there. And then there's the day itself, and you've got to be at the best of your game on that day. And it doesn't always happen, we know that, but you got to be focused, and you got to have the energy, and you got to have the passion. So the other thing, and I've been fortunate as a consultant to be in the room while agencies pitched, which is a fascinating place to be if you've ever done that. It's a little gag worthy sometimes because you realize the manipulation that's going on. But the thing that I remember over and over, and we would make the same mistake at Landor, and I tried to stop it, but you can't control everything. Talking about yourselves, you know, you come in, the first 20 minutes is all about what a great agency you are and all your clients and all your cases and everything else. And we tried really hard to change that completely in reverse. Spend 90% of the time talking about the client. You wouldn't be in the room if they didn't already know that you belonged there. They can do their own homework. They wouldn't have put you on the pitch. You did the RFI or the RFP. So now you're in the room. You don't need to brag. You should be there talking about your understanding of their problem and how you empathize with it and how you think you can solve it for them. And then at the end say, just as a reminder, or the other way to do it is through your case studies as you go along. Here's problem A that you identified. Here's a way to look at doing that, and you take them through a case study. This is all stuff you probably know. Leave behind doesn't mean much, and you don't need to kill a lot of trees to do it. And then lastly, and this sort of goes back to the beginning of where we started on my little talk here. If you don't win, but you didn't totally boot it, you know, you didn't screw up on somebody, you have an opportunity now to make a new friend. If you did a credible job, take advantage of that. And we did that a lot. That's what we use these loss reports for. So we would have the fact that we did a loss report by an independent person that we had to pay to call up the client and ask what went right. And we did it for both wins and losses, by the way, because they're both important. The losses may seem obvious. The wins will tell you what sold them and what you are expected to do when you get to the table with them for real. It really makes a difference. But either way, I've yet to have a client not impressed by the fact that we did this, even if we didn't get the business. And the first thing it does is, you know, because everybody, you know, you're how many times have you heard, oh, you guys were number 2, right? We heard that all the time. Oh, it was just really close and you were number 2. Well, there were probably 4 or 5 agencies in the pitch and they were all number 2 also. So what you want to get at is why were you number whatever, and start probing that. And in that process, if you are asking those questions and get straight answers, it gives you something to come back to and develop a relationship. And more than once, not only was a prospect impressed that we did this survey, but we made sure that we kept at them. They were in the database now. If we had a new client that we got that we did some great work for, you want to share it with them, you want to invite them to a seminar, you want to invite them to lunch. We got Citi by staying in touch after we kind of blew it the first time. And that ended up being a multi-million-dollar account, which in the branding business is a big deal. I got the same thing with a number of IBM other clients by doing this, by following up on the loss reports. So they are business development tools as well as information gathering. So why do agencies lose? I don't know. It's usually not the money. It is more often than not. In fact, even if you go back to that chart that I showed you with all the colors and everything else, fees were only, I think, two of the reasons. And as a boss of mine used to say, well, you didn't lose because of price, you lost because you didn't demonstrate your value. And that's true. You didn't make the price worth it in whatever you were telling them. Not establishing rapport before or during is hard, and especially when you're dealing with procurement, but you can do it. You can actually make a friend out of procurement if you manage it well. Doesn't work every time, but it can work. And it worked for us. We pitched the World Trade Center, which ended up being a multi-million-dollar project. And our business development person made sure she was in touch with that guy for weeks at the right time, with the right answers, not overbearing, but always in touch. And it gave us a very friendly entry when we finally got down to brass tacks. Failure to understand the critical decision criteria, not having the right team. We've talked about all of this. Failure to identify the decision maker. Not always the person who's managing the process. In fact, very often it's not the person managing the process. It's somebody else in the room. And another boss who had a real nose for this. You need somebody in the room with real EQ who can figure out where the money is. because that's the decision maker. And sometimes it's the quiet person in the corner. But if you can suss it out, and some people are really good at that. And I tried to get good at that. It's hard. Was it the right opportunity for the firm? And then there is the off day. It happens. We've all been there where we had all the right information. We did all our homework. We just sucked that day for whatever reason, or it wasn't good enough. And what you can't do anything about it. You can't get a redo, but what you can do is make sure you understand why and try not to let it happen again. So I'm going to turn it over to Phil. That's my story.
So as you go back to your agencies, here are some questions that you might want to think about. For example, what's your agency's reputation in the marketplace? Do you really know? How do you know? What do your clients say about you to others? When a client gets a reference call, what are they going to say? Better know. What do you think your agency does best and why? What do you think the agency does best in a pitch? What's the Achilles heel? What's the weakness of the agency? Is there a well-defined and, importantly, respected process for new business pitching? Are rehearsals mandatory? Is there a clear leader? Are your people engaged and enthused? Do they show up when asked, and do they show up having done what they said they would do? How many times have we all been there when Harry or Mary arrives at the meeting and clearly haven't done what they were supposed to do? And then last but not least, as Hayes has been talking about, is there a professional post-pitch follow-up process? Do we actually really want to know why we won or lost? And the win part is almost as important as the lost part. I'll give you an example. I did a one-pitch assessment for a client that's very much in the direct marketing business. And I was doing an interview with the president of the client company. And I said, you know, after we got through why they won the pitch, I said, so what do they have to do to be successful? He said, the phone better ring. Pretty simple. The phone better ring. Okay? Because that's the business they're in. So it was very clear for the agency, better make the phone ring, right? So very useful. So as we've been saying, I hope this is mostly just plain common sense. I'd like to think that all of you know this stuff, that we haven't brought you anything that you didn't already know. But as Hayes has been saying, it's the consistency of execution that makes the difference. You know, we've all been watching the Olympics, right? I mean, look at it. So I had a client once say to me, you know, Phil, when we are doing a big assignment and we've got the usual suspects in the room, right? So one day it's Ogilvy, another day it's BBDO, another day it's Y&R, another day it's Gray, the usual suspects. He said, you know, you could think of it like this. It's like the Olympics. If someone told you that they got a 9.3 on a 10 scale, if you didn't know anything about it, you'd think that's pretty good. But a 9.3 isn't going to get you a bronze, for sure. So if you think of it this way, the client starts with 10 points and you get deductions. So everything better be absolutely on that day. As the great golfer Gary Player once observed, the harder I practice, the luckier I get. Thank you.